Hi, I'm Lauren Epstein, the host of You're Hired Radio. I'm glad you're with us today. I was in San Francisco a few weeks back, and I interviewed a bunch of people at the HR Tech World Conference. I just want to let you know that it was HR Tech World. A couple times I said HR Tech Conference, I misspoke. So we hope you enjoy the show. It's about all things HR technology. A lot of them are fascinating shows about the future of work and the current economy. Thanks, and enjoy the show. Hi, welcome to another episode of You're Hired. I'm your host, Lauren Epstein. You're listening to 96.7 FM, Arlington, Virginia. We are in San Francisco, sunny, beautiful San Francisco, and we're at the HR Technology Conference. And I've been talking to a bunch of amazing folks who are so plugged into what's going on in recruiting and what we would call talent acquisition. And today I have a great guest, and we're going to be talking about what he's been working on around organizations and sociology and kind of how organizations are structured. So I hope you'll enjoy the episode. So with me today is my guest, Peter Hinssen. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Hinssen. So Peter is from Belgium, and welcome to the show, Peter.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
So tell us a little bit about what you've been doing. What do you do now?
What I do now is I travel the world talking about how technology is changing companies and organizations. I had a different life before that. I did startups for a long time. I did 20 years of startups, and I loved every single moment of that. But running a startup is extremely emotionally charging. I mean, it's grueling.
So technology startups.
They were 3 tech startups. I sold one company to Alcatel-Lucent, one to Vodafone, and we did one IPO. And after 20 years, my family was fed up, and they had an intervention, and they said,
like a real intervention?
Like a real intervention. And they said, you had 3 startups, you have 2 kids, you spent more time on the 3 startups than the 2 kids, why don't we change that? And it was no choice. And then, I don't regret it, but I do feel a little homesick for the startups because it was such a wonderful life.
Yeah.
So I now invest in startups.
Yeah.
I like doing that, and I have to be there from time to time. My mother had this strange thing with babies. She had to smell a baby's head at least once a month to feel alive.
Yeah.
And I need to smell a startup. I like corporates. I like big corporations, but I like the grunginess of a startup, and I need to feel what they're doing. And it's my lens onto the future, onto the new things and new technologies.
Yeah. The first job I had out of college was at a tech startup in the Bronx, no less.
Oh, wow.
We made the first VGA to NTSC converters.
Wow.
And frame grabbers and Genlock overlay stuff back in the 80s.
Did you enjoy it?
I loved it.
Yeah.
I mean, I love startups.
Yeah.
So you gave a talk earlier today.
Yeah.
And you quoted a famous sociologist.
Max Weber.
And so I wanted you to talk a little bit about that because all about how we're organized as workers, and you talk about the future of work. So what's your sense of these things now?
Well, I'm fascinated by how large organizations are getting into I think a point in time where many of the things that used to work don't work anymore.
For example?
Well, you see that you have an enormous amount of people working in large corporations that are fed up with bureaucracy, that feel that things are going too slow, that they're disenchanted, they're disengaged. I think one of the recent Gallup polls show that 87% of employees are not fully engaged.
Right.
And that is a big contrast to what I always saw in my life, because in a startup, you can't hide. I mean, there's no hierarchy there's not even an org chart in a startup. You remember your startup days? I mean, if you're with 17 people in a building, there's no hiding.
Right. Saturday mornings, I would go to the place that built our boards up in Connecticut in my car and pick them up, and that's what we did.
And you're so close to the action. Yeah. You're close to the customers, you're close to each other.
Right.
And one of the nice things that I remember is the moment in a startup when you start to grow and somebody posts the first org chart on the wall, that's when the startup starts to die. And I became fascinated by that because large organizations are run with systems and tools that I think are increasingly becoming obsolete. And the way we, for example, have HR systems that put people in job descriptions in a world that is going so fast, where we feel that it's about skills and competencies, but it's about fluidity, and we have to think about networks of people instead of hierarchies. I see a lot of HR people, and they have their SAP system, and they look at it and think, my God, that is so far removed from what we should have out there. And I think
we're not sitting in the SAP booth. Okay.
No. But I think that is for me a fascination, because as I said, I grew up in small startups.
Yeah.
And if you see them scale, then you start to see why some of these things are necessary, because you can't go from 17 people to 170 without some sort of a system or rules or methodologies or metrics.
Or can you?
No, you can't. You need something. But at a certain moment, those systems take over. And I like to use the analogy of the network and the structure, because a startup is a network. And at a certain moment, I mean, let me put it this way. When you were doing your startup, you knew who the smartest person was.
Sure.
Everybody knows that. You don't need an org chart to say, he's the CTO. On the contrary, the moment that at a certain moment it starts to grow and people put money in it, then people are going to put an org chart, but the org chart isn't the reality. They're going to put on the org chart, this guy is the CTO. Everybody knows he doesn't know anything, but he can talk to the investors, and he has a suit, and he wears shoes, and everybody knows he doesn't know anything about the product. The real guy is the guy who hasn't shaved in 17 days, and probably hasn't bathed in, and he wears flip-flops, and he sleeps with the servers. And the moment that the internal network, where we all know, gets replaced by a structure is a pivotal moment. And in large organizations, the structure is all we have. We lose sight of that inner network. We lose sight of who should actually be talking to whom. And this is something where I believe we're getting into a transition in society, where technology becomes so normal, where we have a next generation of employees who are network natives because they've grown up in network technology. They're fluent in Snapchat and Facebook, and they understand how LinkedIn really works. And I think we need to upgrade our toolings inside organizations to take advantage of that. And if we don't, I think we run the risk of completely alienating a whole new generation of employees.
Right. So talk a little bit about what the sociologists kind of created, right, our modern day.
Well, I think the industrial age produced one thing that is absolutely prevalent, which is bureaucracy. And, Weber, as being the father of sociology, said bureaucracy is the best thing ever, because it is the perfect mechanism to control large groups of relatively unskilled workers, which is exactly what happened in the industrial age. We went from a period where people were farmers into the age of industry, but then we had to get people in line, because if you wanted to work at an assembly line in Ford, we needed some system. And that's how bureaucracy was created. And today we still run that. I mean, bureaucracy is still the standard operating system of most companies today. Right. But we don't have large groups of unskilled workers anymore. We've got a lot of smart people who are very educated.
One of the things I noticed some organizations, if you're reporting to, let's say, a vice president, but really you should be really relating to somebody at the C-level, they don't like that if you're connected, kind of go around them, right? So there's a whole political climate around, well, you got to talk to me if you want to get to them.
Yeah.
And that is kind of the opposite of how our world has evolved.
Exactly.
I mean, I can talk to you, right? Yeah. We've never met, right? I mean, I found you and we're connecting, and now you're, right? So there's no gatekeeper, and this is the natural flow of conversations.
Yeah.
So if we're saying the natural flow of conversations is going to this kind of like really who should be talking to whom based on what's the outcome that we want, how do we build that into organizations? How do we create that when you've got this, hey, these are my people, you can't talk to my people? Like, I mean, somebody in a different department talks to somebody in one of them, like, don't talk to my people, like, they're not your people. And
I think you're absolutely right, and I think one of the side effects of that is that most companies who adopt this bureaucratic system rely on politics to make sure that it doesn't go out of bounds, right? So politics is almost like a side effect of bureaucracy. And I
love how you distinguish bureaucracy from politics.
Yeah, I think bureaucracy is the mechanism, and politics is just the way that we try to deal with that. But I think we're beginning to see in many cases that that doesn't work, so we need to replace it. And it is really challenging to replace something that is so deeply ingrained.
Yeah.
Because most of us went to school in a top-down hierarchical system.
Right.
Because you would have respect for the teacher that will be there, and the teacher would have respect for the principal, and the principal would report to whatever. So all of our lives, we've grown up into this hierarchical type of systems. But in real life, it doesn't work that way.
Right.
You have friends of friends, and you meet people at a barbecue that get you introduced to.
Right.
So I think we see this tension, and certainly for the next generation who is truly network natives. I have a 17-year-old daughter. I came home the other day, and she was in the middle of exams, and her Facebook was open with something like 12 or 13 chat sessions, and I freaked out because I thought, you should be studying. And she showed me that it was math the next day, and somebody pops up a question, did you solve this? And she said, yeah, smartphone, click, and it appears on the messenger, and they were using the network to solve math and learn together.
Right.
And I think
you can't
honestly,
stop that.
You can't stop that. It would be foolish to stop that.
Right.
And I think if we now have the power of a next generation of students, employees coming into the workforce who understand networks like it's the most natural thing,
right,
then to say, whoa, back off. This is the org chart,
right,
and this is your job. And like you said, we're in this silo. Don't talk to them unless you have permission from. That is alien. One of my favorite examples is Stanley McChrystal, right? Commanding officer of the U.S. Armed Forces in Afghanistan, gets sent to Afghanistan and realizes that it was one disaster after another. And he comes to the conclusion that he was trying to use a hierarchical system, fighting an enemy that was not a hierarchy, but the enemy was a network. He was pumping around information faster than he could. And he had to change his organization into a network to be effective. He famously said, it takes a network to fight a network. And I think this is maybe the beginning of how we should start thinking about this. If you see, the outside world has become a network.
Right.
Companies are engaging with customers using social media and new technologies, and they're realizing that we don't sell to people, we've got to influence them in the age of networks.
Right.
And I believe that if the outside world becomes a network, then we've really got to figure out how to turn inside organizations into networks as well.
So if you and I were working at the same company, and I was far away from you by the org chart, how would you want us to connect if I felt like there was a need for us to connect?
Yeah, it's a really good question. One of the ideas that I've seen that I think is brilliant is that I see companies setting up alternative systems. And one of the nicest that I've seen is Procter & Gamble, for example, has started to experiment with this notion of tribes. So you might work in marketing, and I might work in IT. We would never meet. I mean, yeah, they are separate silos, and they would. But for example, that somebody organizes a tribe to think about customer engagement using social networks, right? And
a broad concept.
And I would see that and say, you know what, hey, I kind of like that because I have an affinity for digital and technology. I'm curious about this tribe. I'm going to join the tribe, listen to the tribal leader who facilitates discussion. You're a marketeer, and you say, oh, this is about customers. I got to go there, right? And we would meet in the tribe. That would be a wonderful way to actually start to connect.
Right.
And I think, honestly, this is what happens in real life.
Yeah.
And if we start to have these mechanisms in inside organizations, I met somebody at Procter & Gamble who used to run a department who had 1,200 people reporting to him and was deeply miserable, and now runs a tribe. He's a tribal leader around a particular topic and has brilliant conversations. He can organize a tribal meeting or a tribal gathering, have hundreds of people from the entire company, really doing meaningful things and building bridges.
Right.
And he says, I'm much more happy now as a tribal leader than as a hierarchical leader having to figure out how to do reporting lines for 1,200 people.
You know, Bill Branton, right? Am I getting his name right? Bill from Ireland.
Yeah. I know he is. Yeah.
So Bill was talking about yesterday how, now the thought escaped me, but that anyway, but what you're talking about is how are we going to work in this, like the genie, the toothpaste out of the tube, right? There's no way this is going to stop. Organizations are going to continue to go in this direction. And if you're in a company that's not doing this, then what will happen?
Well, and I think the question is, how can you transition or you take advantage of that? What you've seen is that some relatively new companies have tried radical new ways to escape the traditional route of an organization. I take the Googles and the Facebooks, right? I remember the times when Google and Facebook were really small companies, and
right.
You would go there and they would say, oh, we'll never become a boring company, because we are fresh and young and exciting, and yeah, right. Now these companies have grown tremendously.
Right.
Google is a massive company.
Right.
The funny thing about Google is, if you have, drinks with Google executives, then after a while they're going to start talking about legacy systems and legacy, and it's funny to see such a young company getting the same type of issues that a General Electric or an IBM has.
Right.
A couple of companies have tried to reinvent themselves. One famous example is what Zappos did.
Right, Tony Tsai, who has a desk amongst everyone else.
Yeah, and he said, a couple of years ago, you know what? I don't think structures are going to work anymore.
Yeah. But they tried that new model of like
holacracy.
Yeah, and that also is kind of like.
Well, it's interesting. What are you going to say about it?
Well, it's a little beyond its time.
It's beyond its time.
Like culturally, we don't get it. Like it's a great concept, but we're just not. Human beings are not connecting to it in a way that works. I think it kind of, that happens.
It happens, but I think it's really interesting to look at two things.
So let's talk about talk about it. Let's.
So holacracy is basically an abandonment of the idea of traditional structures, and instead of saying you do B2B marketing in South America, that's your job, it reverses it. And instead of hierarchies of people, it creates circles of work. So it's going to create circles, which is basically people working together on similar issues. And you as an individual are not told what to do. You are free to choose a circle of work that you find interesting and where you think you have an advantage. So it's completely flipping the hierarchical model on its head.
Right.
It failed miserably
at
Zappos, right? So 35% of the people left because they couldn't cope with that.
Yeah.
And I see a lot of HR people now saying, see, doesn't work. No,
right.
We should just go, the traditional route and just use the hierarchies. I think that would be foolish to think that way. What is interesting is to look at the experiment and say, he did it wrong because he went completely black-white.
Hang on.
Day and
We're
night.
gonna take a quick break. Just want to let our listeners know you're listening to Your Hired Radio. I'm your host, Lauren Epstein, on 96.7 FM, Arlington, Virginia. We'll be back in just a second. Lauren Epstein, you're listening to You're Hired, playing here on 96.7 FM, Arlington, Virginia. If you'd like to listen to us on the radio, we play on Mondays from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. on 96.7 FM. If you miss that show, you can always listen to us on the web at mixcloud.com, Your Hired Radio. If you're interested in being on the show, you can give us a call at 240-876-0276. And if you want to follow us on Facebook, go to Facebook and punch in Your Hired Radio. Also, we're on LinkedIn. You can reach me at Your Hired Radio. And I'm in space at Your Hired Radio. Okay, welcome back to the show. You're listening to You're Hired on 96.7 FM, Arlington, Virginia. I'm here with Peter Hinssen, who is talking to us about how organizations are structured. So, Peter, you were saying?
Well, we were talking about the holacracy thing and how Zappos is now seen as one of those failures of trying to do something new. I think, in all honesty, it is a failure for Zappos, but it might be an enormous learning for other organizations.
Sure.
And I think what happened there is it went from black to white, from day to night, too quickly.
Yeah.
And I think if you combine it, you have the full power. I think you need the structure where the structure makes sense, but you need the network where the network makes sense.
Right.
And I think those companies who are capable of making that transition, understanding how to do both, they are going to be the ones who really get it.
Maybe there are some people who belong in a job that's not in a network, and maybe there's some people who prefer to be in a job that is in a network.
Absolutely.
Right?
And I think
could we say that it's a hybrid?
It's a hybrid, and I think
and being able to have that technology to be able to be flexible enough to go between these different structural styles.
Yeah, and I think
because there may be even like the notion of entrepreneurship.
Oh, absolutely.
Right? That
absolutely.
doesn't fit into hierarchical structures because who's the boss and who's like. So you need a little bit of that.
I think you're absolutely right, and I think what is fundamental is it means for companies that they have to abandon this notion of one size fits all.
Right.
And I think this is the biggest danger that we now have. I take the Google example again, right? So one of my favorite things is that if I take people to Google, and it's wonderful to visit the Google campus, wow, yeah. And you go there and you see people throwing frisbees on the lawn and playing volleyball and taking their Labrador to work. I think, honestly, this is probably an elaborate joke that Google plays onto society. I think they hire people to play volleyball.
They're actors.
Yeah, they're actors. But what is funny is, in what happened a year and a half ago is Google reorganized massively into Alphabet.
Yeah.
And for most people, it was like, why? I mean, Google. Everybody knows Google. Why are they called Alphabet all of a sudden? It's not just a cosmetic name change. I think it's one of those fundamental experiments on new organizational design. Now, let me explain. I'm an engineer by training. My favorite subject as an engineer was thermodynamics, and I didn't understand any of it when I was 21. The older I get, entropy starts to mean more to me. But the nice thing about
you're more at rest.
Yeah, exactly. But the nice thing about thermodynamics is every refrigerator we have in our house works on that principle. And it's about a really weird thing because something like water, a water molecule, the way you arrange it, it can be ice that you skate on, or water that you drink, or even vapor that you inhale, but it's the same molecule, it's just how you arrange it. And I think thermodynamics for organizations is the same, right?
Organizational thermodynamics.
Organizational thermodynamics. Yeah. I love that idea. And I think startups are super fluid. They can shapeshift. You see something in the morning, you address it in the afternoon. The moment that a company starts to grow, they hope to remain fluid. But the irony is, the moment that they really make money, people say, don't touch it. This makes money. So they freeze the model, and they often freeze the organizational structure. And if there's one thing that thermodynamics shows us, if you stay frozen for too long, you become rigid and you die. So why do refrigerators work? Because they turn this into a cycle. It's this combination
liquid
of
gas.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
So it's turning this into some sort of a...
We should tell people that if they don't know how air conditioners work or things that make cold, is that the part that's hot is a gaseous freon or gaseous, whatever the show is, and then when it's cold, it's actually a liquid. And there's a compressor, which in fact compresses it into the liquid.
Absolutely.
And that's how it works.
You know your thermodynamics.
Well, you know what? I have a house, and we're getting new air conditioners. So you bet your butt I know what it means now.
And to your point, it's a combination of the liquid and the gas. It's a cycle.
Right.
And I think, coming back to Google, if you go to the people who do search, right? They make
at Google. Yeah.
It's the biggest business.
Right.
They make $75 billion a year. And honestly...
75 billion with a B.
Yeah, billion with a B. I've never seen them playing Frisbee. I've never seen a Labrador. It's maybe the most hierarchical command and control part of the organization I've ever seen. But at the same time, they have like the labs like Google X where they make the driverless cars. And they have Verily, which focus on the future of healthcare. And what Alphabet has done is built a portfolio of pockets of fluid and superfluid and frozen, and it works together.
Right.
And I think the future of organizations will be exactly that. You got to figure out that it's not a one-size-fits-all, it's a portfolio.
Right.
And you will have people who say, you know what, I don't like Labradors, I don't like throwing Frisbees, I like to have a boss.
Yeah.
And I like to just know what I'm supposed to do so that I know what bonus I'm going to get.
Right.
But you
Okay,
also...
Let's talk about, this is exciting. I mean, I think people are getting it. I'm getting it. So let's talk about it in reality, right? So I go to a company and I'm like, hey, I want to be in the superfluid part of this company. And they're like, what? Well, look, hey, I do talent acquisition and I can do all these things for you to create this result, but I don't want to be in this structure. And they go, well, that's nice. We're going to hire somebody else. So what do we do? Like, how does this...
It's a very valid point. My reaction to that is, if you're a smart organization who is concerned about the fact that we're living through very tumultuous times with more change than ever before in history, you probably are going to become irrelevant if you don't have people who are capable of doing that superfluid.
And as relevant as quickly as you became irrelevant as quickly as you became relevant.
Absolutely, or even faster.
Yeah. Because a lot of the companies that are on the Fortune 500 are not there anymore.
Well, I mean, they're disappearing very quickly.
Yeah.
But I think those companies who can reinvent themselves are going to live on. And the number one trick to reinvent yourself is to hire really, really talented, passionate people who are capable of really changing that tanker. And let's be honest, 10 years ago, the really smart kids, the really, really talented, passionate individuals would have no problem going to work for a big bank or a big insurance company because that was something that was meant to be. But now, a lot of those really smart, passionate people are here in San Francisco doing startups and saying, you know what, we're going to build something that is going to disrupt these really boring old companies.
So maybe if we start breaking up, and when I say we, obviously not you and me, but if we break up some of these really strong institutions, and I'm thinking like education, government, and create these more fluidic spaces, we might have more innovation, more productivity, more effectiveness.
I agree. And you touch on education. This is something that I'm very passionate about. I mean, I have two kids, 13 and 17. The way that we are treating them in our educational system is actually a shambles. I mean, if I look at the curriculum that my 17-year-old has, it's the same subjects as I had 35 years ago. In a world that has changed overnight.
They don't need to know anything anymore. I mean, as much as we did. We needed the new facts and figures, but that's all on the internet.
That's all on the internet.
Now they need to be able to collaborate and create these super fluidic work groups.
Absolutely.
Like your daughter was doing. She was doing it on her own without any prompting, using her natural network, like you said. Creating a very, I'm sure she probably knows it really well.
She knows it really well, and I do think.
Do you test her?
Yeah, absolutely.
And is she smart?
Yeah, she's very smart. I mean, and she really...
She's going to listen to this now.
Yeah, she will. Yeah. But I think what is interesting there is that the educational system is so slow to react to that. To the enormous frustration. I think we have a lot of kids in school who are mentally burnt out because they're the YouTube generation. Listening to a professor for an hour or an hour and a half is mental terror for this generation. And that's why I think, I'll give the example, right? So you now see two really interesting educational platforms, Udacity and Coursera, which are extremely, they're on the rise. Right? They're completely different. Udacity is for very focused technology, so STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics. But it's a platform where you can study things at a fraction of the price of a normal education with quality that is far superior of anything you have in a college. For example, at Udacity, you can enroll to study to become a self-driving car engineer. There is no university in the world that has a degree that teaches you to be a self-driving car engineer, but it's online where you find that type of quality. And the guy who teaches it, Sebastian Thrun, is the guy who developed the Google card. So it's like the Messiah giving lectures.
My washing machine, the door on my washing machine melted, I think, and water was coming through. I went online, I found a video of a guy changing the door on my washing machine. And it cost me $20 to buy the part, and I did it myself. And had I not had that, it would cost me hundreds and hundreds of dollars.
Yeah, exactly.
So
there you see the power of the video. The other one is...
Are you familiar with the Smartly?
Yeah, Smartly. Yeah,
so Tom at Smartly was on our show a while back. And that's amazing. For those who don't know what it is, it's an app where you can get a master's degree for free. And what's great about the technology is that it engages you every 7 seconds. You're going to talk about...
Yeah, and the engagement is important. I was going to talk about the Coursera thing. So Coursera is 50 of the best universities in the world. who provide courses online for free.
Yeah.
So you can say, I'm going to take, a course in algebra from MIT or Stanford and English literature from Yale or Duke. Some of the finest professors in the world, perfectly captured, for free. And if at the end of the course you want an accreditation, you pay $50. $50! The nice thing there is the way they engage is every learning moment is only 15 minutes long, so a TED Talk.
Yeah.
And then they figure out, do you understand this? Can you apply this? My best feature on Coursera is there is a speed button, and you can slow it down.
Right.
But the average playback is 1.2.
Yeah.
So imagine that. And that is in tune with that next generation. And if you put it back into the context, how we educate our youngsters, but also how we educate our people inside organizations is medieval by comparison.
Right. Like we'll bring in a trainer and have them sit in an all-day course in a room, and that's just boring.
That is completely not what it should be.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, you're making me think about, and I think the listeners are probably thinking like, okay, so one of the things you get from going to Stanford or Yale or Harvard, you get the context, right? You get the certification and you get the content, but you get the context. And so if I now am kind of like in this gaseous state of making networks, I can create my own network. I don't have to worry about I went to Yale and I met these people who also went to Yale, or I went to Harvard and I met these other. That I'm going to create that like your daughter did organically, and probably be a lot more potent and actually a lot more streamlined.
Yeah, I fully agree. And I think it's going to be a transition where if I'm JP Morgan, I might not hire somebody who just went to Coursera, right? Because it's like a gamble. But I think very soon you're going to see that you're going to have really smart people, creative people, who use the power of the network and online content to give themselves an extremely rich content and also a very, very, very strong context and network as a result.
Well, I mean, they'll be the hiring managers.
Yeah, they'll be the hiring managers.
And so it won't be anyone, like now millennials are hiring managers.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, they're the ones making all these decisions.
And they'll get this sooner than anybody else.
Yeah. So now what? Now what do I do? Like, oh my God, the end of the organizational structure is upon us. If we don't shift, we're going to die. I'm a worker. What do I do?
Well, I mean, first of all, as we said, I mean, it would be foolish to do something completely as a day and night.
Like, what would I say to my listener who's like, people are listening to the show, like, how do I adapt right now, today?
Well, I think the need to adapt is, in my opinion, going to be the number one capability of humans going forward.
So we did a show on the future of education, and at University of Maryland, what they're doing with kids who are coming in as freshmen, they're giving them a variety of programs to experience different things. So, for example, marketing students, sports students, whatever, they're putting them on like a science project where they're actually investigating the effects of antibiotics on certain bacteria. I mean, they're doing research, real science research. As freshmen, you could be a business student or a math student, and the idea is that 65% of the jobs for these, elementary school kids don't even exist. They don't exist, and so we are kind of facing like some of the brunt of that because the world has changed and maybe we haven't as much, but there's going to be change even more.
Yeah.
Like you studied what?
Engineering.
Engineering, and you're not doing engineering now.
No.
You're speaking and writing, and
But I think that is going to be an enormous challenge in the sense that even today, technology is changing so fast. I know computer science professors who teach freshman students the beginnings of AI and realize that this is a field that is changing so fast. By the time they finish their education 4 years later, what they taught them in their freshman year is already completely outdated, right? I think what we're beginning to see is we have to prepare ourselves. I have a colleague who talks about the 100-year life.
The one what?
The 100-year life. So kids born today have a pretty decent chance of becoming 100. And this is an enormous, if you think about it, our parents had this naive idea that you would study until 21, 22, and that would probably give you enough knowledge to last until your retirement.
Right.
Well, we already know that doesn't work because, we're all doing things that we didn't even anticipate when we were studying. But our kids are going to be getting into a work environment where they might have 9 or 10 different jobs during their entire lifetime. That 6 or 7 of them don't even exist yet. We don't even name for it. So the number one thing that we can give this next generation is mental agility. That's the number one thing. If you have, I'm a parent. I'm concerned. I have a 17-year-old who now has to decide, what am I going to study, right? And that's a really tough question. I'm in this techno world all day. I see all these fundamental changes.
Does it make you cringe when you think, like, I've got to invest in a 4-year college that honestly could be not the best preparation for
Yes.
life?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if I think about this, there are 2 things that spring to mind. One is I've got to invest in an education that is going to give not just the content, but that context. And building that network and building social skills might be even more important than studying facts, which is really weird if you think about it. And the second thing is that if you do something, you've got to make sure that you really stimulate that mental agility. I think that's the number one thing.
Hang on a second. We're going to take a break. You've been listening to Your Hired Radio on WERA, 96.7 FM here in Arlington, Virginia, with my guest, Peter Hinssen, all the way from Belgium, and we're talking about the future of work. We're going to take a quick break. FM, Arlington, Virginia. I'm your host, Lauren Epstein. Thanks for listening to our show. If you're interested in getting on the show, you can give me a call at 240-876-0276 or follow us on Facebook at You're Hired. And you can join my meetup where we teach interview skills at Interview Skills to Get the Job at meetup.com. Again, I'm your host, Lauren Epstein. You're listening to You're Hired on 96.7 FM, Arlington, Virginia. Welcome back to You're Hired on 96.7 FM, Arlington, Virginia. I'm here with my guest, Peter Hinssen. We're talking about the future of work, the future of future. And we've been talking about how organizations really need to kind of adapt their structure and that we as human beings need to adapt our learning. So you're about to come out with a book.
Yep.
And what's the title of the book?
The title of the book is The Day After Tomorrow, and I'm well aware that there's disaster movie.
Right?
And we spent many interesting phone calls with the production company and the movie studio to clear those rights. So yeah.
Did you really?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because they wanted to be absolutely sure that it didn't overlap with the plot of the movie in any way, and it doesn't.
So tell us about it.
Well, it's about how companies should be looking at the future in a world that is changing faster than ever before. And the main premise of the book is very simple, is that most companies look at tomorrow with the things they know today. And they extrapolate today and think that's tomorrow, right? And I think in a world that is changing faster, that doesn't work anymore. It's this old, you can't get there from here type of story.
Right.
And I believe that what you need to do is you need to understand what this day after tomorrow could look like. New ideas, new concepts, new technology, new business models. And if you calculate back, you might have a completely different tomorrow. And I think this is fascinating because we live in a world that is changing so quickly as a result of technology. We see things playing out that were just science fiction a couple of years ago,
right?
And it becomes reality. I mean, self-driving cars is an overused example, but let's be honest, when I was a kid, I was reading science fiction about self-driving cars. 5 years ago, when Google came out, we thought, huh? And now it's here.
Yeah.
And
then the genesis was back in 2000 when they created that X challenge of cars going from Los Angeles to Las Vegas.
Yep.
None of them made it, but that was only 17 years ago.
Yep.
And now we have tons of car companies doing self-driving cars. The main technology, LiDAR, and all the software has come down in price. Batteries are getting better. It's amazing.
It is amazing, and I think that is just the beginning. If you see what is happening in the world of algorithms and the world of artificial intelligence, if you see machine learning, if you see robots capable of programming themselves, algorithms of learning themselves, we are on a roller coaster ride in terms of technological innovation that is not just going to be, this is stuff for the geeks. This is going to impact every single one of us.
Right, and it's not 10 or 20 years from now.
No.
It's next year.
It's the next years that we're going to see this. And some of this is really threatening, and some of this is really exciting. The threatening part, I think we should address it because it's a very real thing.
Yeah. So talk about the threat. What's the threat going to be?
Well, I mean, if you know that in almost, I think it's 30 states in the U.S., the number one occupation is truck driver.
Yeah, right.
Then the question is, what are we going to do with all those truck drivers if very soon the insurance companies say, listen,
it's cheaper and safer to have a computer.
Especially safer.
Yeah.
I mean, insuring a truck with a human driver is going to be much more expensive than with an algorithm very soon. That's something that we couldn't even think of just a couple of years ago. And what if this is just the beginning? What if this is going to have an impact on people who now do information jobs? Because let's be honest, I don't think it's going to impact there's a lot of talk about, we're going to use robots to change manufacturing, right? The number of manufacturing jobs in this country is less than 9% of the total workforce. We've already changed a lot of the fabric of how we work. 70% is in services, and a lot of that is in information services. People who are in an insurance company or in a bank, or doing stuff that is basically just manual processing of information. That is going to be even more impacted than robots taking some assembly line work. We're not prepared for that. Society is not prepared for that. And I think this is something that we're going to have to do a lot of serious work to start figuring out how to deal with that. One of my favorite interviews with Obama was in the last 2 weeks of his administration. He gave a wonderful interview in Wired magazine with the head of MIT Media Lab, openly talking about robots, algorithms, automation, impact on jobs, and things like basic income. It's amazing that somebody who spent...
And you mean, when you say basic income, you mean the idea of giving people a basic living income?
Yes.
So basic living income, the idea is that everyone gets a certain amount of money that doesn't give them a lifestyle, it's just a small amount of money. And there's been a lot of data, a lot of research on how this actually works. So in Alaska, we have a basic income, guaranteed income, and in some other places in the world. But go ahead.
And this, I think, in all honesty, that would have been an absurd idea just a couple of years ago. It was seen like some, communist farce idea.
Right.
And now we're beginning to realize that we're going to have more and more people that are not going to be contributing to society, and we've got to figure out a way to...
In the way that we've had that happen.
Yeah, in the way that we had it in the 20th century. They may find something else to do. And I think we're going to see an acceleration. We've got to figure out, what are these people going to do? How do we stimulate them to still do something creative instead of lying on the couch all day? I think it's fascinating. To be very honest, I thought it was a little... Obama is a technology guy. He really likes this stuff. I think it's too bad that he only did that in the last 2 weeks of his administration.
Yeah, right.
He had 8 years.
Well, he's fighting in a hierarchical, like the ultimate hierarchy.
Absolutely.
Is the White House and the whole United States government.
Well, any government in the world,
Any
basically.
government, right.
But
although some governments, I think, probably have a lot more flexibility.
Yeah.
Like, is it Estonia? I forget which government, but they're like really on the bleeding edge of using technology.
Estonia is one of the most leading countries in the world using digital to completely rethink society and the government.
And I wonder what it's like to work in the government in Estonia.
Well, I think Estonia is a really good example. The other one that I really like is Singapore, right? And I'll be the first to say that Singapore is not the cleanest democracy in the world.
Yeah.
But what is interesting there is they, for example, made a 20-year horizon of all the technologies that are going to impact their country and said, okay, if we have AI and algorithms and machine learning and self-driving, all these things, they're going to impact mobility. They're going to impact education. They're going to impact all these things. And they're executing that plan. You can just check this out. You just go and check the long-term plan of Singapore. It's on their website.
Wow.
And I think it's fascinating to see that those countries have a roadmap on dealing with this day after tomorrow.
Wow.
And in many of our Western countries, we're not even there yet.
No.
Far from having a vision, we're then incapable of executing on a plan. And I think this is something that we're going to have to ramp up. And that's why I think it's going to have to come from corporations.
A real interesting example of this here in the government was that, the new administration, the Trump administration, took down a lot of the content from a lot of the government websites. So what those folks do, who are digital natives, they created these Twitter accounts to keep the dialogue going.
Yeah.
So you can't really shut down the communication. That's, I think, the first thing. That cannot happen anymore. And now I think maybe one of the reasons we're seeing more quote-unquote leaks or information that you wouldn't normally see is because it's so portable and so
Fluid.
Yeah, it's so fluid. And while that's not always good and maybe not always preferred, how do we leverage that?
Yeah, and I think you're right. I think communication is first base. But suppose that you would start a new country today, right? You probably wouldn't build it the way that we have governments today.
Right, and this is where we're going. So, like, how do we reform it?
Yeah, and I think there are so many new ideas, new technologies. Take artificial intelligence and machine learning, but take blockchain. You could build probably an administration
Based
and a
on
government
blockchain.
for a country like the U.S.
Right.
with maybe 20% of the people that we're employing today.
Right.
Now, that's interesting to think about, right?
Right. Imagine all of the financial transactions happening, and people don't know what blockchain is. But if you're listening and you don't, Google it, because it's not complicated, but basically it's an open architecture for all transactions. So if we all have transactions, they're all in a ledger that we can all look at and see and kind of corroborate. But check out blockchain on the internet and find out what it's about, because it's going to be the next thing.
I think absolutely. What happened with the World Wide Web 25 years ago,
Yeah.
it changed content and business to consumer forever.
Yeah.
I think blockchain has the same potential to change transactions and B2B in the same impactful way. So it's going to have a huge impact. But I think it kind of shows that we've got to take this very seriously. I became fascinated a couple of years ago by the concept of Vuca. So
What's it called?
it's called Vuca Volatile. It's a 4-letter word, and it's about volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And it's a fascinating story. So the U.S. military, for a very long time, during the Cold War, had extremely smart people thinking about their Cold War strategy. And what they did is they fed huge amounts of data into very complex mainframes, churning out big mathematical models to figure out what the strategy should be. After trying that for 30 years, they said, we're giving up. It doesn't work. Because the world keeps changing faster. Our models are not adequate to keep up. They flipped 180 degrees to what they call VUCA, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. Instead of trying to predict the future, you have to prepare yourself for a world that is going to be increasingly volatile, more and more uncertain, more and more complex, and there is no black and white anymore, it's ambiguous. So instead of trying to figure out and make sense, you got to prepare for living in a world of uncertainty. That, if the US military is approaching that as their mechanism to go forward, I think this is something that we really have to take in. What it basically means is that we're going to see more change in society, organizations, markets than ever before, and building companies like we did in the 20th century, built for efficiency and scale, don't work anymore. We've got to rebuild organizations.
Okay, so let's give an example of like how would someone listening to the show rebuild their organization? I mean, you got people listening who have maybe 50, 100 person organization in the old style, and it's working. Maybe it's working okay, they're making money.
If it's working now, that's fine. But think about this. In a world that is changing so fast, are we going to
Okay, so you're not proposing necessarily, if it's working, don't necessarily mess with it.
No, don't mess with it. But prepare yourself. Think about what your day after tomorrow could be like. Think about what kind of skills that you would need to understand this day after tomorrow. Listen to people who are closer to the future. Let me give you one extremely simple free tip. A lot of companies out there have new employees who come in, and they would mentor them. You would be in the business for 35 years, you know everything there is to know about this business. Young kid comes in, you say, I will mentor you, I will show you everything I know. But this is the freshest pair of eyes onto this day after tomorrow. This is the lens into the future. Reverse mentor. Invite that young kid half an hour every 2 weeks and use that fresh pair of lenses to look at the future.
Right.
How are you talking to customers? How would they do it? Look at your employees and how would you? Well, that reverse mentoring is one way to think about the network.
Just to hats off to the folks who are older and more experienced. I think that in our culture we don't value wisdom. Right? And wisdom is really what older people have. They don't have knowledge, because like you said, knowledge constantly changes.
Yeah.
But that when we start to appreciate wisdom, then I think there'll be room to appreciate the youth. the younger ideas.
Yeah, and that's absolutely true.
Because a lot of young people are like, screw you, adult. Like, the world sucks and you're part of that, so I reject everything you say, which is what a lot of kids say.
True. But take the example. I mean, I've been teaching at London Business School for the last couple of years.
What business school?
London Business School.
Okay.
Yeah. And one of the really nice things that I do, if I have like senior executives who come in, and many of them will be in their 40s or 50s, and they're very important. And then I say, okay, you have kids. Oh yeah, they have kids. How old are they? Oh, 17, 21. I said, well, do me one favor. Your really smart kid is going to spend a week with your company, right? And on Monday morning they come in and they would just do the normal way that a new employee comes in. Describe the dinner conversation on Friday night after your smart 17-year-old or 20-year-old has seen how your company works. Well, that would be quite embarrassing sometimes.
Yeah.
So I think you're right about the fact that maybe this next generation doesn't respect always what we've done, but maybe it's healthy from time to time to disrespect and have a completely fresh perspective on things.
Right. Well, and right? Not one.
No, absolutely.
Right? And not or, but to appreciate what the value opportunity is. So, so how can folks reach out to you if they want?
Find me on LinkedIn, Peter Hinssen. And
spell your name.
Hinssen, Peter Hinssen. And there's a website as well, www.peterhinssen.com, and everything that I have in terms of blogs and videos I post on there, and it's easy to catch up.
When's the book coming out?
The book is coming out on the 22nd of June. It's called The Day After Tomorrow.
And that's 2017, and they can get it on Amazon.com?
They can get it on Amazon, yep.
And is there going to be a digital format?
Of course, it's going to be a Kindle version available. I mean, it would be foolish to have a book about new technologies and not have an electronic version.
And are you going to have videos, like little videos of the book?
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to try our best to put as much material out there as we can.
Well, Peter, I want to thank you for coming on the show and spending some time talking with us here in San Francisco. Go out and buy a copy of Peter's book. And thanks again for listening. This is another episode of You're Hired. I'm your host, Lauren Epstein, and you've been listening to 96.7 FM, Arlington, Virginia.